You've seen Valentine hearts, roses, love letters, promises written in red ink. But in medieval Europe, Valentine's Day could mean something very different. For some people, it meant your name was drawn in public, your partner chosen by chance, your future decided by neighbors, priests, and custom. This wasn't a holiday about romance, it was about order. And sometimes, that made it frightening. Stay with me, because the Valentine you know today was shaped by centuries of pressure, fear, and ritual, long before it became about love. In the medieval world, love was not considered a personal decision. Marriage was economic, strategic, a matter of land, labor, inheritance, and alliances. The church regulated who could marry, when, and under what conditions. Families negotiated unions like contracts. Feelings came later, if they came at all. For most people, especially in villages, courtship was communal. Everyone knew who was speaking to whom, who lingered too long, who crossed boundaries, and Valentine's Day, falling in mid-February, became a symbolic moment when these pressures surfaced, not because of romance, but because winter was ending, work cycles were restarting, and households needed stability. In the medieval world, love was not something you discovered quietly or kept to yourself. It belonged to the community. Marriage was rarely a private promise between two people. It was a public arrangement shaped by family, church, and survival. Who you married determined land ownership, labor responsibilities, alliances between households, and even a village's stability. Feelings were secondary, often irrelevant. Courtship happened under watchful eyes. Conversations took place in shared spaces. Lingering glances were noticed. Rumors traveled faster than intentions. For women especially, reputation mattered more than affection. A perceived misstep could follow someone for life. The church reinforced this visibility. Marriage required witnesses, approval, and adherence to strict rules about timing, kinship, and conduct. Love without structure was viewed as dangerous, chaotic, impulsive, sinful. Valentine's Day emerged within this framework not as a celebration of emotion, but as a moment of social alignment. When people paired, it was expected to make sense to others, to family, to neighbors, to God. Privacy, as we understand it today, simply did not exist. Love wasn't hidden in letters or whispered promises. It was negotiated, observed, and judged. And for many, that made intimacy feel less like freedom and more like obligation. Parts of medieval Europe, especially rural communities, Valentines was linked to lot-based pairings, names drawn from bowls, temporary bonds announced publicly. Sometimes these pairings were symbolic. Sometimes they carried expectations, companionship for the season, shared labor, or future consideration for marriage. What mattered wasn't choice, it was visibility. Once paired, the community watched. Breaking a pairing could bring ridicule. Refusing one could signal defiance. For young women especially, participation wasn't optional, it was tradition. Valentines became a moment where chance and pressure met, and that uncertainty made it tense. In early America, pairing by chance was not unfamiliar or especially romantic. In colonial towns, lotteries were practical tools used to assign land, fund churches, and even determine military service. The idea that fate or God's will could be revealed through random selection was widely accepted. That same logic quietly extended into social life. In some 18th and early 19th century communities, Valentine's pairing games appeared at winter gatherings and church socials. Names were drawn from bowls, sometimes to assign a Valentine for the season, sometimes to encourage supervised courtship. These pairings were temporary, symbolic, and carefully monitored. They were meant to reinforce order, not passion. For young women especially, these rituals offered limited choice but clear boundaries. Being paired publicly signaled acceptability. It made intentions visible. In a culture wary of secrecy, randomness felt safer than desire. By the Victorian era, these practices softened but did not disappear. Parlor games, calling cards, and structured dances replaced open lotteries, yet the principle remained. Relationships emerged within systems, not spontaneity. In America, love was often organized before it was ever felt. Chance was trusted more than impulse. Church attempted to guide these customs through faith. Saint Valentine, or rather, several Valentines merged into one, became associated with vows, fidelity, and moral order. Relics were invoked, prayers offered, promises sworn in churches, not gardens, that some young people pledged themselves before altars on Valentine's Day, believing the saint would guide their future spouse. But these vows weren't romantic gestures, they were binding statements. To break one risked spiritual consequence, not heartbreak, in early America. Saints were not distant European figures, they were moral reference points woven into daily life, even in Protestant regions that officially rejected relics and intercession. Names of saints lingered in town charters, calendars, and church dedications, quietly shaping how people understood virtue, duty, and commitment. Catholic communities, especially in Maryland, Louisiana, and later immigrant cities, carried older traditions more openly. Small relics, prayer cards, and saint medals were kept in drawers, sewn into clothing, or placed near bedsnots for romance, but for protection and stability. Vows made on saints' days were believed to carry extra weight, binding promises to sacred time. In Protestant households, vows replaced relics. Courtship promises were often spoken before witnesses, sometimes recorded in family Bibles. A promise made publicly or before God was treated as morally enforceable. Breaking it carried social consequences. By the 19th century, Valentine's Day absorbed this language of vows without the theology. Cards echoed sacred phrasing, faith, constancy, devotion long after belief faded. What remained was the structure, love framed as a promise, witnessed by history. Not just a feeling in a world where faith shaped daily life, that weight mattered. By the late Middle Ages, poems and ballads began to mention Valentine's Day. But they don't sound like modern love poetry. They speak of luck, chance, fortune's wheel turning. Here's one line, written in the 14th century, often attributed to the era's Valentine tradition. For this was sent on St. Valentine's Day. 1. Every fowl cometh there to chase his make. Translated simply, on St. Valentine's Day, every bird comes to choose its mate. Not destiny, not romance. Observation. People watched nature and believed. Humans followed similar cycles, pairing because the season demanded it. Love wasn't magical, it was expected, and expectation can feel heavy. What made medieval Valentines unsettling wasn't cruelty, it was lack of control. Your name might be drawn, your future discussed publicly, your role reinforced by tradition. In small communities, there was nowhere to disappear. Valentine's Day didn't promise happiness, it promised alignment with society, with faith, with the calendar itself. Over time, poetry softened, choice expanded, privacy grew. Valentine's slowly transformed from obligation into affection, but its origins remind us of something quieter and older. This day was never invented to celebrate love. It existed to manage uncertainty at a moment in the year when people needed reassurance that life would continue in order. Romance came later, and perhaps that's why, even today, Valentine's still carries pressure beneath the hearts. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. When you look back at these older tradition saints' days, public vows, community witnessed promises, do they feel comforting or restrictive? Do you think love meant more when it was shaped by ritual and expectation? Or are we better off now that it's private and personal? And if you know a family story, unarranged match, a church vow, a Valentine saved in a drawer for decades, share it below. These quiet histories are how we understand our own. If this kind of forgotten tradition matters to you, save this video and stay with the channel. There's much more of this past we haven't talked about yet.